Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the final session of the NEPC Primary Colors of Education conference. My name is Andrea Soldo, and I'm a social researcher from one of the NEPC member organizations, Promente Social Research from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I have a pleasure of being your moderator today. I apologize in advance for the sound of my voice because I'm not in my full capacity today, but I hope it should not be a reason for you not to enjoy and participate in today's conversation with two not just great researchers, but also very, very nice people, Purtu Meltem Arik and Mladen Tomaset. Hi, welcome. I will just shortly introduce you, and of course you can elaborate more when I give you a word. So Purtu, maybe most of you know her already, is a researcher and educator in the areas of K-12 education policy, climate change education, and environmental education. She explores the fissures where dualities of body and mind, nature and culture, human, non-human, teacher, student, school, home, are curled from the perspective of education for sustainability. Mladen, also many of you maybe know him, is a philosopher and researcher whose research interest focuses on theories of scientific explanation, degrowth compatible explanatory frameworks of social metabolism, and social attitudes relevant to sustainability. He is currently engaged in research on sustainability and degrowth disposition of small semi-peripheral societies and ecological aspects of social stratification in Croatia. So I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to not just talk with two of them, but also to share together with all of you all these like interesting ideas and thoughts that we will have opportunity to be and to share with them today. So if others would like to introduce themselves or just say hi, please the chat option. It's in the upper right corner, if I'm not wrong. And also, if you would have any comments or questions, please note them down so we can address them during or at the end of this conversation. And yeah, now I would just like to introducing the context. So, and easily to introduce us to this topic. So the context of 21st century is a context of unacceptable inequality, ecological collapse, and different kind of uncertainties, meaning that we cannot continue teaching as if nothing has changed. And in order to introduce any meaningful changes in education, we need to explore and we need to be exposed to different and new ideas. Therefore, today's panel will discuss ecological justice and degrowth as earth-centric philosophies built on a critique to economic growth and their possible application in education. Mladen, Purtu, welcome and hi.
Hello, hi. Thank you for the invitation.
It's always a pleasure.
For beginning, just to be sure that we are at the same page when talking about ecological justice and degrowth. Can you please just briefly define what are the key terms and key ideas of degrowth and ecological justice so we can start with that?
Mladen, would you like to start with degrowth?
Okay, thank you. I was going to do the gentlemanly thing and push you into the first speaking position, but I always get this difficult question, what is it? And people usually more easily understand what it's not. And then I have been preparing this morning for a context of working with people who know about education. So here's my attempt to first read you a definition by a young colleague, Bengi Akbulut from Turkey, and then maybe repeat some key terms in my own words. So that's like that kind of official and unofficial teaching. So paraphrasing Bengi's recent article from this year, she says degrowth has become a forceful conceptual framework and a political mobilizer for imagining and enacting alternative ways of articulating society, the economy, and nature. While it is most straightforwardly understood as material downscaling, degrowth denotes a far more encompassing transformation, a break with the ideology of growth, the repoliticization of economy, and the reorientation of economic relations along different principles. Topically, that means we must teach about degrowth thinking and activism and be open about the points of tension therein. It is an evolving paradigm. It's not set in stone. It's not a religious canon. In doing so, we should focus on the possibility or impossibility of sustainable socialist growth, the broader processes of capital accumulation beyond their outcome, the question of work and the question of emancipation, and the scale and agency of degrowth politics. So that's Bengi's definition. In keywords, we need to talk more about material and energy throughput, and later on we can return to the essence of that, to the concept of degrowth, and much less about its connection to actual measurable economic activity like GDP, which is not really central either to the idea of growth or to the idea of degrowth. So this is a trick that we focused on one number. The other important related concepts are colonization and decolonization. This is especially in criticism of why this D in degrowth, why negative, why start with something and then opposing it. Well, there was a time, as Jason Hickel says, when colonization was considered a good and beneficial thing. There you come with all your Enlightenment rationality and the right choice of religion, and you simply put these uncultured people on the right path. We know now that was neither empirically the case, nor is it an ideology that we could ethically adhere to in any meaningful sense today. Therefore, decolonization was exactly the process of challenging that original narrative of making better, and basically asking for different ways of emancipation and existence and understanding oneself. I would stop there for an introductory definition because we've got a lot more talking to do.
Thank you, Mladen.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be a member and to be among you. It's really nice to see you all, old friends and new friends. In order to discuss ecological justice, I would like to think with CARE Collective that we recently read in Turkey, and the Commonwealth Research Collective that some of us are a member of. I also, NEPC is also a collective, so I will also think with NEPC as well, hopefully. Earlier today, probably, during the noon, the World Inequality Report 2020 was launched. I didn't look at it yet, but we can, here we can all guess what it reflects actually. Let's put it at the very beginning that neoliberal capitalisms produce new forms of injustices as we speak. And injustices in all systems, including the education system, weakens capabilities of individuals and communities and disrupts justice regarding distribution, recognition, and representation. So ecological justice aims to extend the borders of justice towards the non-human environment. Although I don't like the prefix non, I prefer more than human. But this is the jargon, so I will continue to use it, non-human environment. And actually, working towards extending is not new. In 90s, early 20s, there were reflections regarding the discussions, and also the discussions on relational ontologies of these divisions, nature, society, human, non-human. This is not also new. But the new thing which is growing and is critical is the dialogue between human and non-human, and that's really critical. Rethinking justice through the relationality of human and non-human life is important, and that's the essence of ecological justice. And it frames this relational existence of human and non-human ecologies, not only as a being, but as a matter of justice. What exists in the world and elsewhere in the universe exists in relation, and human societies exist in relation to non-human ecologies, properties, entities, organisms, things, actants, materialities, etc. As Low and Moll discussed, human societies are never wholly human, and the social is never purely social. So this is critical, and this is what ecological justice discusses and suggests. And we should also, underline that demanding justice is not separate from demanding justice for the rivers and other entities, as you can say. So it is an ethical and political call. It is definitely an ethical call, I would like to say. It also, dismantles the binaries, and as I mentioned earlier, binaries between society and nature. But today, in our context, a teacher-learner as well, and this is also critical. But we should also think and consider that ecological justice is not far from anthropocentric view. It's also anthropocentric, but it invites the extension of the strictly humanist borders of the term as an issue of justice. I would like to quote here from Özge Yaka, a Turkish sociologist, and she defines ecological justice as the background condition of possibility for distribution, recognition, and representation as it sets the conditions for humans to coexist within Earth's ecology. At this point, I would like to add one more aspect to ecological justice discussions. It is critical not only for justice discussions itself, but also for education systems, health systems, any system, you name it, the care discussions. This ecological framing of justice aims for caring. I also see it as a care manifesto that resists against the banality of carelessness, social system of organized loneliness, and increased destruction of all relations on this earth. So it invites forms of connective care for living respectfully and responsibly on this damaged earth, as Tissing calls. Care, thus, ecological justice requires acknowledging the collective agency and interdependence of all earthly beings, human and non-human. Care for people cannot be separated from care for the earth. That is critical. One final thing, we are not considering here as a care, sole care, but a promiscuous, multiple care that we are talking about. All forms of care that include all categories of human and non-human, that can build a sense of solidarity towards all its inhabitants. But not only to its inhabitants, the care for democracy of self is a basis for ecological justice. I will stop here. We will probably open up as we discuss further.
Thank you both. I didn't. My intention wasn't that I ask of you to, in 3 minutes, to deduce the very complex ideas behind these concepts and philosophies. But my intention just was for all of us to understand what are these key kind of topics or key ideas which stands behind it. So if I may, what I've heard is that we are talking about new and alternative ways of seeing and understanding the world that we are in, the understanding and exploring new different functions and roles of all of those included, that we are talking about evolving paradigm, about activism, about care, about dialogue, about ethics. So my next yes,
and about energy and material throughput. Why do social scientists keep forgetting that we have a material base? And I'm sure Burcu would agree. We do need to eat, we do need to breathe, and there's an issue with that globally today.
Of course, yeah. And my next question would be, how compatible are these concepts when it comes to understanding or rethinking the new role of education as a process and not maybe now as a system, but education as a process. What would you say from all this that you mentioned in defining degrowth and ecological justice would be the key principles for education?
Shall I start first, Mladen, this time? Okay, great. As you know, to add a sentence to what Mladen tells, humans are not social only, but ecological beings, and we keep forgetting that. So it's really critical that you mentioned. Thank you for that. I believe that there is not an alternative to not be compatible. It has to, and it is, to your question. And here the role of education can be rethinked with the earth itself and its principles that create conditions to life. And we keep forgetting these principles that create conditions to life, sustainable life. I believe the first step is recognizing that life on earth is interconnected and interdependent, and it's subject to the same set of operating conditions. Life, as we know, has evolved a set of strategies that has sustained over 3.8 billion years, and we are, living with millions of designers, survivors on Earth. The second step, I believe, is to deep dive into understanding and dissecting the relation between the design of universal education with the current unsustainable structure and complex problems. Unless we dissect this relation, I believe we keep continuing doing the same problems, adding new content to the education philosophies aims, but we will continue disrupting the earth. We need to take down, as a third step, I believe, the reductionist, fragmented, linear, and monotype standardized education models. So these may not seem to be compatible, but this is life and death issue, I believe, and it's critical. And in terms of principles that we may consider while rethinking education, life is complex, so there are a lot of key principles, but I will put here to this table 3 of them. One is diversity, second is cycles, and third is dynamism. Currently, we use incredible effort to create a universal definition of child and education on a planet where there is no such thing as universal. It's diverse. But here we go with the universal ideas and produce among us, we ourselves as well. For the whole country in Turkey, so for example, we are producing education policies for the whole country. But this will not be possible as we still see that groups of children are dragged into this universal structure, but they fell down, and we try to design inclusive systems that within these corrupted systems and label them then as disadvantaged. The second is cycles. There are 2 kinds of cycles in nature, in ecology: reinforcing and balancing cycles. So we should really understand that there is no such thing as continuous growth. In ecology, there is one name for it, that leads to disruption, actually. And the third principle that we can think with, learn from the earth is dynamism. Everything on our planet interacts with each other at any moment, and this interaction brings change. And these processes occur in complexity, but educational processes do not embrace complexity at all, as we see that everything is in silos. We try to pass on life to children by breaking it up, dividing it, teaching them in silos, separating them according to ages, age 4, age 5, age 7, whatever. However, we forgot that learning is a bonding process, and it directly reflects from our neurons. As learning takes place, neurons connect, and the more connections are reinforced, the more brain undergoes a process of change and develop. We keep forgetting these 3 essential principles that from ecology, from earth itself. So these are the key principles and 3 key discussions that I would like to open up, which is the recognizing that earth is interconnected, dissect the relation between the current education system and the disruption of earth, and the complexity of life.
Thank you very much, Burcu. These are like, yeah, food, a lot of food for thoughts. Mladen, would you like to?
Let me try to move away, to be the bad boy in this group, to move away from the complex thoughts, because I'm sure you come here for complexity, and Andreas asked us to think of further reading as well, and eventually I'm sure both Burcu and I will be able to shift a lot of complexity in text and video your way. But if we have this hour together, what I remember from work on education is that we talk about beautiful, complex concepts, but usually deal with really petty funding or really basic common sense fighting for things like health education for youth, because suddenly we can't tell them how to keep their bodies healthy and flourishing because there's a cultural barrier to that or something. So going back to that basic, first of all, whether ecological justice and degrowth are compatible, as was the key theme of the meeting today, I think they absolutely are, and they can't work one without the other. And if you want to learn about those connections in more detail, in the 5th International Degrowth Conference in Budapest in 2016, there was a whole panel, as well as a whole stream of people's research. But there was a keynote panel on degrowth and ecological justice, and I think those videos are still available somewhere on YouTube. It's worth Googling. Google knows everything nowadays. And that's worth watching on where the intricate connections are, but they're definitely along the clever lines that Burcu's given us. The key principles for education in the situation of crisis that we are today, to me, from the really basic introduction to education that I've undergone in my professional work, because I officially am a quantum philosopher, so education was always pushed to the sidelines. But when I got to work with it, I learned about the 3 R's or the 4 R's, and I would say today the 4 R's I would recommend for basic principles of education in 21st century are reading, writing, arithmetic, and revolution. And by revolution, I mean both immediate change in that kind of scary sense that we can say in summer schools and online conferences, but can't bring into practice in real life, but also the revolution of cycles sense that Burcu was mentioning. We do need to realize in what sense the content we're teaching is part of a bigger circle, in what sense the role of teaching and the human existence is part of a bigger circle, and in what sense change is inevitable, and especially now that we have a task of either directing change, which would be along the lines of degrowth, or waiting for change to happen to us, which would be along the lines of catastrophic global recession and then collapse along the lines of the graphs of limits to growth, which all start collapsing after 2030. And apparently we haven't as yet found empirical ways to disprove those predictions. That's a very nasty future. That's a nasty future for any 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds that you're likely to meet in the educational system. It's a nasty future even for the 15-year-olds which have started taking to streets and warning us about what the science says, even though these young people have barely dipped their toes into science as yet, and they have to go and shout that out to the rest of us who've taken to make a living out of it. It's a nasty program for 2030, and it's the one to be avoided, and to avoid it, we will need a revolution of many senses, social and material. There's a lot of talk about it in theory nowadays, but those are the texts I won't be forwarding you at the end of this session, because they might be too insightful, and again, I'd leave you to Google for that. But we do need to make ourselves truly earth-centric, stand with both feet on the ground, realize the severity of the crisis, and then start talking about what resources we have now already to keep directing ourselves away from the precipice, from the edge, and towards a more planned, kind, caring, controlled descent, if you will. I think that kind of touches upon the key principles without going further. Does that answer your question, Andrea?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. And then it just leads me to the following one, because you said you mentioned the complexity of ideas, and of course it is sometimes very hard to grasp them in the understanding, but especially in translating them from ideas to the practice. And you also mentioned that, yeah, we sometimes deal with the complex ideas and wonderful ideas, but the way they are translated into the practice and into the schools are not recognized anymore. So my following questions would be about all these like key concepts we talked about, and then key principles. What are your thoughts on how, and is it already existing maybe, or what different ways can be introduced to operationalize those ideas into something which is called education system, or something what is called schooling process? Do we need to address different ways of introducing change in education? And if yes, what does it include?
To my mind, if you let me, Burcu, we have a lot of history with that. A lot of good people have worked for many decades, sometimes centuries, to make plans for that. We definitely need to rethink the goals of education and the instruments, the subjects through which it is delivered. So there's definitely scope for a major curriculum renovation or a revolution. But we also need to value public services, including teaching. This is now speaking from a degrowth perspective, which again, I don't see as having to clash or negotiate with ecological justice as I've heard it presented from Burcu. We need more public service because we can't afford the material and energy cost of the private provision anymore. It's too expensive for everyone to have their own favorite teacher, either in the form of algorithm or in the form of a human being. We need to put heads together and work with an ancient tradition of some people being a little bit more specialized than others in looking after initiating young people into society, whether it was Stone Age creches and sort of grandmother guardians, or whether it was proto schools leading to elite institutions like the academies of classical antiquity. In fact, what perhaps would be good, and here's an idea for you educational reformists or revolutionists, is perhaps if everyone should do some teaching in their life, either for the young ones or for people in various kinds of need of instruction. Maybe we already do that. Maybe somehow through our professions, we have to spend time instructing others as to how to view and how to do. But certainly it might benefit society, and it would definitely be needed in the lower throughput, higher impact world of degrowth, that we all dedicate more time to teaching and more value to the public service of teaching. And by that, I don't just mean money, I mean the actual respect for the role in society. But again, I'm sure this group is well placed to tell me what various practical obstacles there are to that.
Okay, great discussion. We have been discussing that in Turkey, and I've been following discussions elsewhere in the world. It's not easy to answer because there are many aspects of how to operationalize these principles and concepts into the education system. One aspect is the public-private relation. The other is teacher policies, context, teaching environment, and as we see from the COVID, unfortunately, that it's learning environment is not only schools; it's everywhere at home and the city, etc. So there are different aspects, but one critical thing, if we consider further discussion, is that the participation, the voice of children in all these discussions, and that's really missing, I believe. what I would like to add to Mladen is, would be this. And very recently, I will also share later when we finish the discussions, the recent book that is, translated into Turkish of Elizabeth Young Bruce, and she is discussing childism. It is really critical that as we discuss sexism, racism, we should discuss really childism, and still, considering us as well, we don't hear, we don't listen, we don't try to understand that much how, what children are, where children are in all these discussions. And actually, we should be aware and stop childism, the perception of child, the prejudices against children in all these discussions. Probably that I would like to add to what Mladen discusses. And one more thing, when we consider how to operationalize and how to change, rethink education policies, we tend to forget the impact of education system on the crisis currently. So we should actually make the invisible visible as well, in terms of the impact of education system itself on the crisis, on many crises. The crises are intersectional and complex itself, ecological crisis, climate crisis, health crisis, societal crisis, you name it. And the system is placed right in the middle of, in the center of education system, is at the very heart of these problems, actually. So while considering and rethinking the education and try to find ways, I think these two aspects is also critical, and we mostly oversee or forget to discuss the participation of child, the prejudices against child, and the impact of the education system in the crisis, in building and keeping this unsustainable path.
I would like to add two things which I feel I've forgotten, and I'd like to throw into the mix, but tying in with what Burcu said. On the role of educational system, we definitely need to think of reteaching history and causality in history. We have presented in all over the world the rationalist-based education, the flow of history to the present crisis point, as almost inevitable, deterministic path of progress or development, whereas actually based on individual choices or maybe smaller group choices that led us down one path rather than the other, and these are the ones we need to explore. This is a rejoinder because I wouldn't like Burcu's suggestion to teach about the crisis to be misunderstood and to start one long 15-year-long depression cycle of telling everyone how we massively messed up. So we need to tell them perhaps why the mess has happened in order to avoid it, but also give them the tools to understand that the mess was not inevitable, and the mess does not necessarily lead to them being here today, but was basically a contingent series of choices which can be altered in the future at smaller or greater cost. One thing I forgot to add to my view of what we need to do to operationalize is also to teach the migrants. And this isn't just pandering to NEPC's favorite topic. This is the fact that the most comfortable and currently materially well-off parts of the world will be increasingly depopulated, whereas where people are suffering most is where there is a lot of population as well. Equatorial zones will eventually have to empty out to a degree in the 21st century because they do become increasingly uninhabitable, and yet it's not a straightforward thing to simply move people and dump them into a new context. We need to work with building a better world by socializing people who are coming on the move, both to save our comfortable old age, or at least our crumbling infrastructure, but also to give them a chance of emancipation and a better life. So the third operational goal on top of rethinking curriculum and valuing teaching is to definitely train ourselves in teaching the migrants, which isn't a straightforward thing because it is somebody new and somebody with different experience and quite likely trauma as well, that there's a harder task re-socialize and reintegrate, but also a great little project task for the network as well.
Thank you both. So you are mentioning like the wide scope of different things which can be used in this process of operationalization of these ideas. So from recognizing and utilizing more public services to listening to the voice of children, the exploring the way how the impact of education on crisis can be approached, to teaching the migrants, rethinking curriculum, reteaching the history, etc., etc. What is your opinion on the possible role, or is there any role, or should they have? So these are all my questions in my head, of these big international organizations which are playing the key role in creating global education policies such as World Bank, International Monetary Fund, OECD, EU. So what you see, how do you see them? Are they allies in this process of transforming in transforming the education, making changes and starting the revolutions?
This is questioned more and more today, and I can share the experience from Turkey. And recently, I searched on the policy transfer from these institutions in Turkey and how it moves, how it moves down actually to the school, to the class, and I once again realized the tokenism. It's not even reached, to the classes. It stays in the international documentation without any perspective, without any framework. And I strongly believe that we should reconsider, replace these organizations, since they promote the very values that they put Earth and us all at stake, which is the economic growth, or you name it. So without critically thinking on their aims and the indicators that they change and transfer the policy transfer internationally or within any country, I believe that we will not answer it faithfully. And policy transfer in Turkey is still mostly through international agreements and institutions. That is why there is this perspective of top down. But we are in, if we want to, operationalize, sorry for the word, it's difficult for me to pronounce, operasyonalize etmek, let's say in Turkish, without, we shouldn't only consider teaching, but we should, understand learning from the schools, from the classes, from the teachers themselves. And it's a both way approach. I don't mean to put any, top down or, down to top approaches separately, but they are together and it's critical. So that's how I see the international organizations' role. I strongly believe that, in a summary, I strongly believe that we should, discuss the values that themselves that put Earth and us all at stake, actually.
I would agree with that, although to be flippant in answer to Andrea's question, I'd say they should abolish themselves, because the ineffectiveness of achieving their goals compared to the resources of work, energy, even if we just consider food that they've taken in, makes us question whether they really have a justification for existence in saying things would have been worse without us, or whether we can actually consider an alternative history in which things would have been pretty much the same, or maybe even better without them. But supposing we're not flippant, and given that we all work for them in one sense or the other, and that our friends work for them, and that they're full of good intentions and have lovely conferences and good merchandise, let's say that they should, in the crisis situation of the 21st century, use the values and put them at their core the way Burcu suggested, although even though this will be recorded, I guarantee you they won't be able to truly achieve that in the next 10 years, although they will copy every word and put it on the cover of their documents. But what they should really do is use the instruments that they already have, and they're very powerful institutions, to reward good practice. Not another committee, not another long-term project, not another attempt of a global coordinated deal of 192 nations, some of which, or most of which, are starving, and few of which are so fat that they're throwing away half of their food that they reach to their table every day. But actually use these instruments to simply look for good practice and then reward it and hope for it to multiply through any form of human communication that we can find. So I think do no further harm would be their best motto for the next decade.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Bertul. No, that was the thought that was in my mind, because both the ecological justice and degrowth are proposing different kind of approach to reality, which is to a certain extent very hardly based on critiquing existing neoliberal setting of the world. So I was just thinking, like, if we are going to change something, is it possible to avoid this ideological struggle and fight? Because yeah, it's even for kids, if you are trying to teach them something and their environment is not supporting that, then there is a conflict. So I was just thinking, like, is it possible to start the revolution and to expect certain changes to happen if the most of the world is functioning in one way and following one certain aspect, one certain ideology, such as this case, like this neoliberalism and capitalism and consumerism and everything that we are trying to
I mean, you're fully right to my mind. And again, here my paltry and bad education comes to view, and my minuscule knowledge of Gramsci. But you won't change anything unless you attack ideology. You won't change where you are going tomorrow unless you attack the ideology of your movement and redefine it, whether by choosing a different tram or by choosing a different goal for where you want to get to at 8 o'clock. So for something this big, yes, you do need ideological struggle, and one shouldn't be afraid of that. Perhaps what one should be afraid of is ideologies ready-made and put on the shelf by another group of people and then sort of suggested to you as a solution to your problem. And this is something that good education would never allow you to do. It would tell you to take the books off the shelf, study them, but then modify in how you apply them to your particular situation, probably by picking from more than one, etc., etc. And I think even, again, my paltry knowledge, but even in the cases of engineering, you don't copy and apply 100%. You again modify, even though a lot of what's on the shelf is actually manuals which say this is how you should do it.
Does it mean that? Sorry, Burcu.
No. I was just thinking out loud. You continue.
So let's have in mind, like hypothetically, the some ideal school which changed the way of operating and teaching and learning and the whole organization, whatever, everything that makes one's school functioning, which is based on all these principles that you were talking about. How would that school, one day in that school, look like? Who will be a teacher? Who will be an educator? Who will be in charge, and what should be taught as a content or as a practice in that school? What would be the vision?
Well, my vision would be, actually, since I see that schools in Turkey and I guess elsewhere is disconnected from its own environment, from its own city, from its own region, let's say. I believe that a school will be directly connected to its environment, to the neighborhood, to the other people, to the society, to the city itself, and all the non-human companion species in it. I will actually think on a theoretical level, though, and in this ideal school there will be no central teacher. I believe everybody could be a teacher, and the topics should change daily according to the needs of children, according to the conditions of their environment, etc. Currently, what I mean by this, actually, currently Turkey suffered a lot from floods in one part of the country through the summer, and forest fires, huge, long-lasting forest fires in another part of Turkey, another part of Turkey. And actually, we are all schools have the same curriculum. All the schools have the same. Of course, there are differences, but teaching styles. All the schools look to each, physically look to each other, etc., etc. So what I see a kind of ideal school is blended in the environment, reflects to the needs of its people as an ecosystem, and I see schools as incubators of care politics, care for students, care for teachers, care for the society that it is embedded, in it, care for non-human, care for the planet, care for the other, etc. So I would really very much like to see schools as incubators for care politics.
I would very much like to attend Burcu School, but I do fear that it is maintained by solar-powered, happy communist robots, which can do all the cleaning and all the maintenance and all the upkeep of the rest of society, so that these caring groups can focus on the school. And in that sense, my vision is a bit more scarcity ridden, and perhaps sees Burcu's proposal as a horizon goal, but not as something that we can truly expect to see in the next decades. But what we can expect to see, based on multitude of experiences in various zones and cultures, is an organization that is a progressive community center. And when I say progressive, I mean truly linked to the ideology of human survival and progression of humanity as a cultural concept, and in that sense not left to entirely self-governed groups which could, for various reasons of material scarcity or craziness or all these things psychologists like to tell us now, that people will turn conservative and ultra right-wing if they're afraid of spiders and snakes, or react negatively to pictures of maggots. So we don't want those closing in on one such community, and therefore preventing it from serving as a node in a network of maintaining, again, humanity as a meaningful cultural concept. So it would be a progressive community center that is governed by a progressive parent community governing board, so not just parents, so that it's not just an instrument of furthering the desires of their children, but also not just society with no true say for the parents. That board or assembly could then appoint some executive, which is a head teacher plus, as I understand Andreas asked us about operational parts, and again I fear that full democracy at school level every day would lead to a wonderful discussion to death. So there would be some executive running operations. There would be teachers as people who are best placed and valued in the community to impart some knowledge, both theoretical and practical, but they would be rotating, so not fixed in a particular school as a lifelong career and a dreadful dragon that trains about 2 or 3 generations of poor young suffering souls, but as somebody who visits a community, works in a community, and then perhaps applies that to moving to another community. Some of them would be professional, but there would also be a role for students in a temporary teacher role, although not permanent, because I don't quite see how we can survive the next decades with 8-year-olds solving all our problems with their innate ideas and approaches. We do need to harvest some of the accumulated knowledge of the previous centuries. The student body would definitely be mixed in age and ability, much more than it is today, but that's something that you all know about from more than theory. And then, to my mind, the central idea of the curriculum, the last bit of Andrea's question, would be this survival of humanity as a cultural concept, to really teach them to see how they can make humanity as an idea something that is still operational and existing in 99. And that would involve, to my mind, all or almost all of what in detail Burcu was suggesting, and definitely not so much of calculation, accumulation, growth, or exploitation, except as lessons, as something that seems to bring temporary benefits, but actually creates much more widespread harm, and therefore should be avoided in future practice.
Thank you both so much. I just, we'll have a lot of notes after today's conversation. Sorry, I want to apologize to others because I was quite selfish in just asking my questions. So I think we have a couple of minutes if someone wants to comment or just ask a question or just to share or, yeah. So please, if you are one of those persons, Lana, yes, hi.
Sorry, I've taken the advantage of being the first to ask the question. For both of you, I mean, I like envision schools, both of them, and this idea of students sometimes being teachers, but not all the time, and this blended into the environment and the incubators of care society. But you know, our systems really rely on assessment very strongly. And I'm sure both of you were high achievers in your own times in school. How do we get rid of this competitiveness that goes with assessment? Or do we assess at all? Is it important? Do we assess? Do we give grades? Do we have passages from primary to secondary to university? Does that exist in this type of school?
Well, I believe that the assessments will be there, but what we assess should change. You know, currently we are assessing even, you know, not the curriculum itself. So how to live on a damaged, you know, the knowledge and the skills that is needed for living in a damaged Earth, let's say, planet. You know, that should be in the content of the education, and that should be assessed. We are not even discussing what is the aim of living, what is the purpose of human, who is human itself. You know, we are not discussing this at all. And you know, I don't know your curriculums, but in Turkey, Işık probably will agree, the curriculum itself is not, you know, is not for today and it's not for tomorrow at all. So it's something that was in the past. It's not, you know, achieving anything. It's not teaching kids anything. That's why here in Turkey, I would see that, and I see that more and more. 8 years old teach actually to their teachers and to their schools themselves on discussing how to live in the stupid crisis that adults are actually responsible of. And the discussions of this childism, you know, the author shares a really, you know, nice thought that we all think. She thinks that most people born in the 80s, like myself, ignore the childism that surrounded their own children and became childish without even knowing it. And the clear sign for us that we became childish is that actually our generation, I'm not generalizing, of course, but our generations mostly overlooked policies that required future generations to shoulder the responsibility while adults focus on economic growth, which has no sense ecologically, the growth, rather than child's being or, you know, societal, you know, well-being, I would say. So the assessments can be there, but the aim and the concept should definitely change. And the current policy transfer from OECD doesn't allow that, actually. It doesn't even allow us to discuss other possibilities of assessing, other ways of content. You know, they are writing amazing reports that are on the shelves already, and you can make a bingo out of their jargons, tombala, but what it means for the class, for the student, it's, you know, we don't discuss. That's my thinking of assessment, Lana. That's a big problem for our region overall.
I would definitely like the future idea of school to have some form of assessment, definitely not quantitative to reducing to one single number like your GPA, and definitely not involving rankings, because this school needs to be immersed in a society where assessment is not a selection process for survival, where you know that you have a role in society anyway, and any assessment is to perhaps direct you to either advance faster or better hone your skills. Why would I want assessment? Is because I wouldn't want a medical doctor that hasn't had any assessment operating on me. I've recently had a very nasty brush with the medical system here in Croatia. I think most of the doctors I've met have either cheated in their assessment or have been let through without proper assessment because they're largely incompetent other than on the mechanicals of a few specialist things that or jargon that they could spew out. And that's not something that you want in a caring society. Again, you wouldn't want to also be operated on by a doctor who just thinks that they're a doctor and nobody's actually tested their knowledge or skills. So there is a role for assessment, a different form of assessment, and definitely a different role for assessment. At the moment, assessment, like GDP, is a simple quantification to produce one number which gives the worth of your life. It basically says how far you can advance to get the comfort, preserve yourself, help your nearest and dearest, etc. That should not be either the role of assessment or education in society, nor should the society be set up on these competitive principles where supposedly we all benefit from only a few select ones grabbing most of the energy and material that we deal with.
Thank you both. Thanks, Lana, for your question. I don't see anyone else. No. Okay, so we are, yeah, our time is off. Thank you all, and thank you, Burki, and thank you, Mladen. I really enjoyed our today's conversation. I hope for others as well. For me, it's just like triggered and opened some kind of new ideas, and definitely if you were not familiar or introduced with these concepts and ideas before, I truly believe that tomorrow you will definitely try to find out more about the ideas and the new alternative ways of thinking, not just life, but also education. I will now give my word to Lana, because as I understood, this is the final day of the conference. And yeah, thank you once again for inviting me, and also for this opportunity to hear and think about different important things together.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, very much. I will just close very quickly the conference that lasted 2 days and had about 4 or 5 panels. What was interesting for me is that from the very beginning of the first panel, which talked about inclusion, over to the emergency funds and what members were trying to do within the COVID pandemic, to the projects that we are currently working on, all of them are concerning inclusion, and then today's to talking about networks and their effect on policy at national and regional context, to this final panel, they had one theme that kept coming up, and that is the student voice. And that tells me actually that we are moving in a society to thinking about going against the childism that Burcu mentioned, but also realizing that we really need to listen to the students and see what they need and how they need to work. And I think that actually that we were all grown-ups in this panels and all adults. The fact that we have all throughout all these panels came back to student voice gives me some hope that we are moving in that direction. Maybe I just close with the idea that Greta, as a young person, has started a lot of a revolution already, and that she is an inspiration to the new generation. I think we need to really look into what she's saying, not only her, but all the other young adults about what they need and how they see their future. So again, thank you all the moderators, thank you all the speakers. Thank you all the participants. We close another online conference, the second one. Hopefully one day we will meet We'll try to make it sustainable so that we don't spend too much energy and material throughput, but we do meet in person because it does give us also this component of care that I think Buchu has mentioned, and we need care and connectedness as well. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm sure we will be meeting soon in one way or another, and wish you the rest of the year to be calmer and maybe more healthy all the way around, and the best for the new year and for the festive season to all. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. See you all again at some other occasions.
Thank you. Goodbye.